Hello, and welcome to the Daily Vent, a medical mom podcast. My name is Nicole Orchard, and I am your host. I am a trach and vent mama. My son was born at 23 weeks. He is now 18 months old. He has a GJ tube, and we just came home from the hospital about 2 months ago after about 16-month stay. So we're freshly home. What I wanted to talk about today is coming home from the hospital. What exactly does that mean? And also why it can be scary and exciting and just overwhelming all at the same time, right? When John was born, the most exciting thing to me was home, the idea of coming home, right? I'm so excited to come home. That's all I wanted. All I thought was, once we get home, all of our problems are done, right? We're home with our child. Life will be so normal and simple again. That can be the case, right? I'm not going to speak for everybody. But what I have found, and for myself, is that it's a whole different game when you're home. And it'll hit you sometimes. So sometimes I wish that people would have prepared me a little bit more. But it's almost as if you don't want to burst someone's bubble, right? When they're about to go home and they're so excited to take their child home. You don't want to burst their bubble and tell them, hey, pump the brakes a little bit. Let's be realistic about what this is going to be like. Because when John was ready to come home, Jordan and I were ready to take him home with no nursing, like nothing really set up, because we just wanted our son home. We didn't want him in the hospital. We really were scared about him being developmentally super delayed by living in the hospital any longer. It was just a lot. So backstory, when John was 9 months old, so January, he came home end of January at 9 months. He came home on very high vent settings, but we and his team felt comfortable that he was going to be on these settings for a really long time. So it was either he stayed in the hospital while we worked on getting these vent settings down, or we went home and we were trained and we just would make it work. Because, what's the difference, I guess, right? In our mind is just go home and let him live a normal life. I think he was really stable when we went home for the most part. He'd have a couple BPD episodes here and there. He was stable, though. So that was the plan. We went home end of January. We were super excited. We had like 30 people outside the hospital lined up with signs. Jordan's sheriff's office came and lit up their cars outside. I mean, it was a huge thing. We had banners with John's face on it. It was a very exciting day. After like 60 something days, 80 something days, John was going to come home. John came home, and within 26 hours, he coded at home. We didn't have any nursing set up at home yet because we were just so excited to come home that we didn't want nursing to delay it. And home nursing is very hard to find if you're not familiar with that, depending on where you live as well. But yeah, 26 hours after he came home, I was napping and Jordan was also taking a nap, and Jordan's grandma was watching John. He was in his swing. He was sleeping. He was fine. We were all right there within a couple feet. And I hear her yell my name. And I knew it was not a good yell. She also had taken all the trach classes, so she was familiar with everything and what to do. But she knew that the big thing is when his color changes is a huge thing. So when your child starts to turn blue and gray, it's not ideally good. And we really had a shitty pulse ox at the time, and anytime he would desat, it just didn't pick up. So we would always go based off of color. That's kind of what we were taught in the hospital. She yelled. We ran over, immediately got him out of the swing. At this point, he was limp, lifeless, and there was no pulse ox picking up, but I can only imagine what his oxygen saturation was at. And then I had no heart rate. So we immediately started doing code procedures and bagging. The issue is when you train at the hospital, they train you, and this is very common, but your hospital might be really good at training. And I'm not saying our hospital was not great at training. They did a phenomenal job. But there's just so many things that you don't think about unless you're in a home setting. And so when you train, you're in a hospital room. And guess what? There's oxygen on the wall in the hospital room. So when you learn to bag and you're practicing bagging and you're practicing doing CPR and a trach change and all of those different things in an emergency type of scenario, you hook up to the oxygen on the wall or oxygen tank you have like in your stroller or just in there, right? So we had just come home. We had not been home a full day. And he starts coding, and we thought that we could just attach the oxygen, the line from the concentrator to the bag. Well, if you have a trilogy vent, which is this vent back here, the oxygen tube, the connector that goes in the side, is really tight. And it's not easy to pull that little clip off. So our son is purple and blue laying on the ground, and I'm bagging, and my husband is trying to get this thing off so that he can connect the concentrator to it, because the concentrator is like far away and it's like a 20-foot cord. He can't get it off. So I'm bagging with it, no oxygen attached. And our son was always on 2 to 3 liters. So bagging is great, but it wasn't quite helping him. And I started to get his color back, and it was my first time ever bagging. And so I'm kind of like looking at Jordan being like, get the trach, we got to do this, blah, blah. And I stopped bagging for like probably 10, 20 seconds. I don't know. And immediately my son started turning blue again, because I'm like, oh crap, I am his ventilator and I need to just continue to bag. And so then I'm panicking more. And at that point, I gave the bag to my husband and I said, just bag him. Like, let me handle this. We have one of those big, what are they? A D tank. If you know what a D tank is, we have a big D tank. It looks like a torpedo on a submarine. It's like 5, 6 feet tall. Maybe not that tall. Maybe like, I don't know. It's very tall, very wide, big green thing. It's got to be hundreds of pounds. It's very heavy. And it has like a regulator built in on it with a little key on it. So do you know what I did? You know when like the car falls on a kid or something and you get that weird mom strength that you can lift a whole car? That was me in that moment. I picked up the whole thing, dragged it across the entire house, because we just had it in a corner in the kitchen because we were just going to store it. And it was more of like our oh shit tank. Like if the power went out and we just needed oxygen while we waited for the power to come on and couldn't use our regulator, because it can last like 4 days or 3 days. Well, I pulled that across and then attached the bag to it. And then his color started to come back because he was getting oxygen. I think it went up to 4 liters, which is like nothing, but it worked. At that point in time, we did an emergency trach change. There was no plug. We thought maybe it was a plug. There was no plug. And EMS arrived and they light flighted him back to the hospital because it was rush hour Friday. And we lived 45 minutes from the hospital. And he was still pretty critical. So life flighted back. Felt like such idiots, felt like such failures because we had just left and now we were back. And I was like, I think we pushed this. Like, I don't know. And we were just kind of also disappointed, not with how we performed. We did everything that we were trained to do, but I just feel like we weren't as prepared as we really expected, because you don't prepare to have a code 26 hours after you come home. So we went home, and our house is like Fort Knox because we have so many people in and out. Husband works in law enforcement. We don't play around. We have cameras everywhere in our house. I'm used to it at this point. We did Monday morning quarterback, and we sat down and watched from every angle the entire incident. We timed it. We figured out exactly what went wrong, where we could have done better, what we could have done faster, how we could set up the house better. And we really did learn a lot from it. We sat down, we wrote down notes, we made a DSAT protocol, we made a protocol on what exactly to do if he needs to be bagged, like everything that needs to be happened, CPR, all the things. praying we would never have to do it again. And then the time comes to bring John home 2 days later from the hospital because everything was fine. He was negative for everything. I mean, the doctors literally said that he looked better. Like when he got to the hospital, he was laughing, playing, of course. Like in the helicopter, he was playing in the back with the EMS people. Like, that's just my son. He wakes up from codes. He's coded 7 times. Every time he wakes up from a code, he's happy and laughing and like, hey guys, what's up? Like, why is everybody in my room? Like, are we playing? Like, that is my son. So we get to the hospital and the doctor that's on from the PICU, like everybody met us down in the ER because I called them like on the way to the life flight and was like, I just coded, like I need, whatever. So they all met us down there and they looked at him and they're like, you're telling us that like he just coded? He looks better than he did yesterday when he left. Like his color was great. Everything was great. We brought John home because we thought that that was just like a one-off thing. We didn't think anything of it. We thought that was just a one-off thing. Didn't worry about it. Thought it might have been a plug and we just didn't see it. And maybe we broke it up into his lungs. Whatever. Normal trach things. If you're a trach parent, you know that these BPD spells can happen. So we brought him home 2 days later, and he was home for 2 weeks. Because we got sent back into the hospital, our like home nursing somehow canceled. I don't know. So we went a whole week and a half with no nursing again. Well, I guess we'd only been home a day, so a whole week and a half without nursing. And then the nursing agency that we with at the time was awful. So we only got like 2 shifts covered that entire 2 weeks. We were home for 2 weeks. And then one night I went to sleep. My husband and I were just doing shift work. It was really hard. And I think it was like 2 a.m. We have oh shit buttons in our house is what we call them. And if you've seen my like house setup tour on TikTok, you've seen them. And they're in my Amazon store as well, so you could get them. But we have oh shit buttons. We have one on the vet stand and then one by his crib. And if that gets pushed, like you just come running. Well, I had just fallen asleep and I hear that noise and I got up, ran out there, and my son was completely colorless, completely still, no pulse, laying there. At this point, Jordan had already grabbed the bag off of the oxygen tank. We were now prepared. We had an oxygen tank in each corner of the house, including the large D tank. On each oxygen tank, we had a bag and we had a regulator on each one with a key. And that's something they don't go over in the PICU or NICU as well. They don't really teach you. An oxygen tank is really useless unless you have a regulator and a key on it. And even if you have a regulator on it, if you don't have a key to turn it on, it is so useless. Like one time we went out and I brought a bunch of oxygen tanks, but I didn't have another regulator and a key. Or it's like, if you don't have that, what's it going to do? We had to like fly home in order to get home because we needed in time because we needed oxygen. So that's something that's really important as well, is to make sure that you have a regulator, which is basically what you put on top of the tank. And then you put what amount of liters that you need. And then a key is what turns the knob so that the oxygen can come out. So what we did was the DME will only give you one or two regulators, right? The DME, we love our DME, but with insurance and stuff, they only cover so much. So we went on Amazon. If you're listening to this DME company, I did not do this. This is not something that I did. But if I'm not listening, you go on Amazon and you buy regulators, and they have them that go up to 15 liters. 15 liters is 100% oxygen. So if there is something happening and you need to bag your child, you want to give them 100% oxygen. The regulators that the DME gives you only goes up to 4. 4 liters and 15 liters is a huge difference. So we bought like 4 or 5 regulators on Amazon. They're cheap. They're $20. I mean, they're not cheap, but they're not as expensive as you would expect them to be. And then what we do is we zip tie the key onto the regulator. So every regulator always has a key. That is very important. Every regulator always has a key. So every tank in our house has a regulator with a key on it, and it's set to 15 liters with the bag attached. And then the bag is on the proper PEEP with the proper pressure settings with a mask on it as well. Even though our son is a trach, you want to have the mask on there. You take it off, obviously, but you want it close by because worst case scenario, if you can't get the trach back in or something like that, you cover the hole and you have the bag, the mask. We always plan for worst case scenarios. And I'm not trying to do this to scare anybody. I'm not. This is not, I don't want to scare anybody. The reality is these things don't happen all the time, but it is so much better to be prepared and be ready for a situation like this than it to be too late, you know? So anyway, what was I saying? Let's go back to my son coding, me walking out into the living room in my PJs and seeing this. My mother-in-law was there. She started calling 911. I immediately started bagging. I don't think we had the regulator yet on the big tank that went to 15. So we were bagging at a liter of 4 liters and doing a code. While I was doing those two things, my husband was getting the trach because when in doubt, change it out. My husband was getting the trach off of the crib, coming over and setting that up. He had to have been out for over a minute. When I go back and watch the footage, he wasn't moving for a solid minute. It's hard to see the coloring of him, but of course the pulse ox wasn't working. So we had no idea what his heart rate was, oxygenation levels were. That was probably one of the scariest moments of my life. That was a really bad one. Eventually, there was a tank to my right that my husband brought over, or my mother-in-law brought over, that had 15-liter regulator on it, and we quickly switched that, and my son started to look better immediately. The ambulance got there, and I, same thing, just shaking, just trying to process everything. He was fine, acting like himself within 15 minutes of the incident, and we were taken to the hospital. So he ended up having like coronavirus, the original one, and so we thought that maybe was what it was that caused it. So we didn't think that we didn't really correlate the two codes together, but we decided to just keep him for a little bit longer just to kind of see what the hell was going on, because it was just weird. It was just so weird that he kept doing it. And then I think like a week later, he did it again. I forget what it was. He did another code, but it was in the hospital. So at that point in time, we decided not to bring him home for a while. And we ended up having to move because the people we rented from sold our house and gave us 60 days to move. So that was fun. And we moved, and we decided to keep him even longer in the hospital because moving with a child who has this much, look at all the stuff behind me that always needs to be accessible. Like you can't pack it up and unpack it or move it and unpack it in one day. It's not possible. On top of everything else that you don't see in this room. We moved, and then 4 days after we moved, he came home again. And that was in March. He was home for 2 weeks. He was doing okay. He was up and down, still on like a peak of 16. Like he was on really high, peak of 18, I think, which is, looking back at it, I can't on that. But we wanted him home. We thought he was, doing good, but he started having GI issues and throwing up a lot of his feet and not really handling it, having a lot of gas. And then one day we took him back via ambulance to the hospital because he was on 10 liters and just not sat great, and he just wasn't keeping down any food. And so I was just like, you know what, let's just go back. By the time we got to the hospital, he was back on 2 liters and he was stable and fine. And we were like, all right, we'll go home tomorrow. Decided to keep him. We were going to keep him there for a couple of days because I think that was like on a weekend, and we wanted to see what was going on with his GI stuff and figure out exactly what we needed to do to keep his feeds down. We had switched like 8 million different formulas. Nothing was working. We were on the way to the hospital the next day, or we were about to be on the way to the hospital the next day. I had just talked to the nurse. She said he was fine, that he was playing and everything was great. And about 20 minutes later, I got a call from the doctor, which is never good when you get a direct call from the doctor, that he had just coded for 6 minutes which is his longest code, over 6 minutes. He needed drugs to get her back. And yeah, that was a hard call. And he was okay. He was out of it. If they had to do an EEG, everything was fine. Thank God. And then 2 days later, he coded again. At this point, my husband and I looked at each other and I'm like, he is not coming home for a long time. I'm not risking it. I will keep him in the hospital for years. It's not worth it. I wasn't going to do it. I was not going to code my son home again. I was not going to sleep. Like, there was no way I was going to bring a child home and be able to relax with him being that unstable. And typically these kids, as you get older, you stop having codes, but he just kept having them. Later on, we discovered, after another code, we thought we solved it with the GJ and doing J feeds and keeping his stomach open. We thought that's what it was. But eventually, a couple months later, he coded again after we had gone months without a code. Discovered that he had 100% tracheomalacia collapse, which means his trachea, when he would bear down randomly in his sleep, which is when these codes were happening, to fart, to poop, just when he was just stretching, he collapsed all the way, which was causing these codes. It was also causing him to be on such high pressures because his lungs were super overinflated and he didn't need all that support. We went to Johns Hopkins, got a tracheoplexy, which I'll do an episode on that. Basically, it's where they sew the back of your spine. No, they sew the back of your trachea to your spine. And then they sew the back of your bronchi to your spine. So he has 6 stitches in his trachea and 4 in his bronchi, 2 on each side. He went from a PEEP of 16 to a PEEP of 8 in 3 weeks, 2 weeks after the surgery. Technically could have gone home right away. We decided, absolutely not. I'd like you to go 2 months without another code before we talk about going home. And decided, basically, I couldn't keep him there forever, and that I needed to get him home before RSV season, because the PICU is full of it during virus season. In a way, having him come home those short times before and realizing how intense home can be, especially when your child is not 100% stable, made me very grateful for the hospital. I was never mad that I was there. I never hated it. Whereas before, I could not stand the place. I just wanted to go home. I hated driving there. I hated driving home from there. I just didn't like it because it sucks, right? I drove 45, 50 minutes there and 45, 50 minutes back. I hated having no privacy. I hated not being able to do normal things with my kid. I hated that my kid was without me all the time. It wasn't ideal. But afterwards, I had such an appreciation for the hospital that was the safest place for him to be. And that this was just a part of our chapter. Just a part of John's story. Just a small part. One day, he'll be home forever. And life is just not worth it. It's not worth trying to go home a couple months early and risking not being around forever, rather than just being in the hospital for 6 more months and then being at home forever or whatever till he turns 18. Who leaves me? But I just looked at it differently. I think it was a blessing in disguise. That sounds awful, but I really do think his codes gave us a chance to give the hospital more grace and be more thankful for what we had and for the hospital. Enjoy being there, getting to form better relationships with the staff there, loving our son better there. Just, it changed everything. And our attitude was so positive because of it. And that in turn is so good for our son to have just happiness around him instead of being dreadful when we're there. So it was kind of a blessing. I also think that having those codes at home really taught us a lot. We learned so much. Even after the second code at home, we Monday morning quarterbacked it. Sat down. It was hard, but we watched all of it, took notes again, updated different protocols, updated ways we could set up the house. So it was a blessing in disguise, for sure. I don't think God makes mistakes, and it was scary, and I never would have to go through that again. And the PTSD of that is intense. there was a solid month where I would say in like August, end of July, August, when talks of discharge started happening, being like, all right, what's the plan? Like in a month or two, maybe we should talk about going home, or you should probably be out of here by September or August, right? They were kind of not pushing us. They were never forceful. I don't have anything bad to ever say about our PICU. I love our PICU team. Every single person there is phenomenal. So I'll never talk bad about them because they're amazing. They never forced us out. They were always so patient with us. Just that team of people at St. Joe's Children's. If you ever are in the Tampa Bay area and you can take your child to the hospital or emergency room, go there. You will never meet better people ever. There's my plug. Okay, I love you, St. Joe's Children. You are the best. Anyways, they were talking about us going home, and I had to sit down like with some of the doctors and be like, I'm scared. I don't want him to come home like for a while. Like, I can't leave him here forever though, but I'm so terrified of him coming home. The fear of him coming home was all consuming. I couldn't sleep. I was taking clomazepam every night in order to just be able to lay down and relax. I wasn't sleeping, even with taking clomazepam. I wasn't myself. My marriage was suffering because I wasn't processing anything. I was just being so negative. I was not doing well mentally. There was like a full month where I was just not mentally in a good spot this past summer because I was so consumed with the fact that my son was going to come home, and it scared the shit out of me. It scared me for him to come home. And that's a normal thing. And so I want other parents to understand that like that's normal. I felt so guilty for feeling that way because so many parents would do anything for their kids to come home, right? And the mom that I was before his codes would have slapped that mom, would have slapped her and said, bitch, are you kidding me? We would do anything for John to come home. Like, why are you pushing him off another month to coming home? Why are you sitting here staying up all night with stress consuming you about your son coming home? Like, be grateful. That's what that other mom would have said. And that was the devil and the angel on my shoulder when I felt so guilty. And then that made me feel worse because I was so scared of him coming home. And eventually, the more I just kind of thought about it, talked to therapy about it, and worked it out with my husband and just talked to the doctors about it, they, reassured me that's normal. You're a mom. It's a good thing that you're scared because that means you respect his disease. You respect his medical condition. And it's always a good thing to have a sense of fear, right? It means that you're always going to be ready. You're always going to be slightly on edge. You're always going to be ready for the worst situation, which unfortunately is hard to live like that. It's hard to live on a cliff. It is really hard. And medical parents know what that's like. You are living on a cliff 24/7. And the slightest thing can just knock you off, right? Your kid coughs. Oh my God, we're about to fall off the cliff. They are sick. They have a temperature, or they're up on their liters, or they're just not, handling their feeds normally, or they're just sleeping a little bit longer. They slept in today. Oh my God, they're getting a virus. It's not like normal baby things, right? Like when my son was teething, he'd get fevers, and we had to panic when he got a fever and run cultures and run all the things because, a fever for him could be deadly. Whereas it ended up being that he was teething because he's a baby and he got 4 teeth at the same time and had a fever. So it's really hard as a medical parent to not think that everything is just terrifying. You're just always living on a cliff. And the doctor said to me, that's normal. It's okay. I'm happy that you feel that way because it means that you're ready. You're prepared for him to come home, and you are trained. You and your husband know everything that you need to know, and you're always going to be home with him, one of you. You're going to find some good nurses that you trust at home. You'll find your people and you'll get in a group and it's going to be okay. And that was really helpful. And then what came over me was the sense of sadness I felt started taking over that fear. And it was the sense of sadness that I was going to miss these people. This was my family. The people in the PICU, they were my friends. This was my social life. My life was the hospital for 16 months. 7 months in the NICU, 9 months in the PICU. That was my life. Every day. The security people that you walk by, the front desk person that you sign in with every day. They check in on you every day. How's the baby? How are you? Then you say bye to them every night. See you tomorrow. This was my life. Every day, the people in the cafeteria. I mean, it's just ridiculous. Like the doctors, the nurses, the RTs, they become your family. They become your friends. They become invested in your child as if it's their own child. And I became really sad because I was going to not be around that every day. Don't get me wrong. I was happy to not live in the PICU anymore and not have to see such sad things all the time, and to have my child at home and to have the privacy and to experience all those things. I was very excited for those things. But the sadness of being away from those people was really hard. And I think it was a blessing, though, because that took over the fear. And I would rather be sad and miss people than just be consumed with fear all the time. So that was really cool that kind of took that over. And eventually the fear kind of, to sum this up, because I'm all over the place in this episode, we were talking about coming home and how to set up your house. I'll probably have to do a whole other episode on things we do to set up the house to be the best prepared for emergency situations and just to make life easier as a medical parent, especially if you're a trach and vent parent. There's a lot that comes with that. Not that being a normal, any other type of medical parent doesn't, but when you have a trach and a vent, it's just so much equipment and so much stuff. And we have learned over time and from so many different resources of other parents and Facebook groups online, just different ways to set up our house that have really significantly helped in living a more smooth life. I don't know how to explain it, what words to use there. Simpler life with all of the stuff. But coming home is a whirlwind of emotions, and that's normal. And I see it a lot, and I experienced it. You come home, you think that the journey is done, and it's time to heal, or it's time to just put it past us, and then that adrenaline goes away. You still have fight or flight, right? But it's a different fight or flight. And so that adrenaline that you had been living on for months, if not years, depending on how long your hospital stay was, is gone. And a couple weeks after you're home, maybe days, it depends, it'll just hit you. And that's normal. That's okay. And so it's important to talk about that with people. It's important to just be open and honest with it. It's important to give yourself grace. Give yourself grace. As a medical parent, give yourself grace. You are doing more than is possible with what you are given in time and with your body. Like, you're doing more than the average human does in a year, and you're doing it in a day. So give yourself grace. It's okay to want some alone time. It's okay to just want to cry. It's okay to just want to scream. It's okay to not want to talk to anybody. It's okay to just go lay in your room one day if you have a good nurse and just let the nurse do everything for a day. It's okay. It's okay. And that is something that I've had to learn, is to give myself grace, because we are our hardest critics. We are hardest on ourselves. And I find that typically people who are hardest on themselves are usually pretty accountable and pretty great at what they're doing. So if you're listening to this and you're kind of in the trenches, you're going to get through it. And it's not going to be easy. Nothing in life is easy. But you're going to get through it, because you have to look back at how much you've already gone through. And if you can get through everything that you've already gone through, and now you're home, you're one step closer. You just have to push through. It's a whole other story, a whole other chapter and story, right? And so it's just going to be different. It's just different mind game that you got to get into. But it's hard. And I really want people to understand that you can go on your timeline too. If you are not 110% ready to take your child home, don't let anybody push you. Ask for more training. Ask for more resources. Go online, join Facebook groups on medical parent communities or different communities of what your child's diagnosis is. And ask people, ask parents, what's the best thing to do? How do I set this up? Research wherever you can. And I know it's hard. And that's why I'm trying to do these podcasts or trying to share things online. And I know a lot of other parents are as well now, with sharing ways that make our life easier, that can help other people. Because that is how I learned everything. And that's where I found my hope and I found my comfort, is because there was other parents that were vulnerable and put themselves out there and shared their journey. And it made me feel more normal, and it made me feel seen, and it made me learn so much that I can prepare my house before my son came home, because so-and-so did this and so-and-so did this. And I would screenshot all these different things, show it to my husband, go over it, and then we ordered what we needed and what we can afford and all those things, and we made it work. So just do your research. I know it's hard, and it's, like we don't have enough going on in our lives, but just don't ever feel pressured. And, if you want more training, you can never have enough training. Practice all the different emergency scenarios before you go home. You most likely will never have to use them, but it doesn't hurt to have it in your pocket. It doesn't hurt to have it in your tool belt. You can never have enough tools in your tool belt. That's from my therapist. Another tool added to your tool belt. Coming home is a blessing. And I don't want that to be lost in this episode. It is amazing. It's a blessing. It's not scary for everybody either. I'm just an anxiety freak. So some people could be like, oh, it's great, and not even worried about it all. Like, I'm not worried about anything. Like, I've met some parents who are literally like, if I don't ever have a care in the world, like, it's great. I'm going home. I don't care. I'm not nervous. I'm excited. And I have met parents like that, and I envy them. And that's great. So it's not scary for everybody, but this is meant for people who are anxious about it. That I want you to know that it's normal. I started this episode out kind of talking about like home setup and how to prepare for coming home, but I got into the whole mental deep dive of how to prepare mentally to come home. And I apologize for that. I'm someone who I make like little notes on what to talk about, but I really don't follow them, and I go off on tangents. It's very annoying, but I don't know how to be scripted, and I don't know how to just like go over exactly what to do. When I talk with other people, I can for sure. Like, that's something I like to do. But when it's just me, and I just kind of like to talk to you as if you and I are just like hanging out, having coffee or a drink, or just like sitting down with our kids playing. That's what I would do to have parents over with the kids and just act like a normal parent for like 10 minutes. That would be great. But John lives in a bubble, so we can't do that. So this is my time to talk with parents. I honestly, when I'm talking on here, I feel as if I'm talking with another mom. Like, I feel like I'm with my community of people just talking about life. And I will never be able to say thank you enough to this community online that I have met, and that have helped me through so many things. I am so grateful for all of the medical parents out there that I have met. And I hope that this helps at least one person. I really do. And just know, give yourself grace, give yourself time, have patience, be proud of yourself. This is not an easy journey. And God does not make mistakes. He gives his hardest battles to his strongest soldiers. Sometimes you didn't sign up for the draft and you didn't want to go to war, but you're pretty badass and you're fighting pretty well. Just remember that. So cheesy. I just want to say thank you for tuning in today for another episode of The Daily Vent, a Medical Mom podcast. I am so thankful for each and every one of you. If you've listened this far, I'm sorry you haven't listened to me for so long, but thank you. You are amazing. We'll see you later.